In today's video, I want to solve a problem I've been wondering about for years. Are expensive canned tomatoes actually worth it? And is there an overall best one? Or is there a certain canned tomato that may have diminishing returns?
So I bought 6 different cans of tomatoes at varying price points, ingredients, growing locations, and tomato varieties, and ran them through 3 different tests so we can get to the bottom of this.
And my entire reason for doing this video is because I, like many of you, have way too many questions every time I walk down the tomato aisle.
For example, do I get diced or whole peeled tomatoes? Are $7 D.O.P certified San Marzanos actually that much better than a San Marzano style tomato? And what does San Marzano style even mean in the first place? Or maybe you have questions like, should I be avoiding tomatoes with calcium chloride on the ingredient list? And finally, are tomatoes grown and imported from Italy just inherently better than ones grown in the US?
Not to mention, there's just some devious marketing tactics used nowadays. If you take a quick glance at this can, you may think these must be San Marzano tomatoes that are imported from Italy, but that actually couldn't be further from the truth.
Once you zoom into the fine print, you'll realize it says San American tomato, and it's grown and packed in the United States. Not to mention, once you take a look at the actual tomato inside, you'll realize it's a round Roma tomato that looks nothing like the logo.
Now, this is not to say it's inherently a bad tomato, but it seems like they're definitely trying to trick you into paying more than maybe you should.
Anyway, my goal at the end of this video is to arm you with all the knowledge and terms you need to know so you can strut down the grocery aisle, know exactly what every canned tomato is offering, and make a confident purchasing decision for the best pasta or butter chicken you can imagine.
Also, I hope some of you try the taste test experiments for yourself because it's honestly just a lot of fun trying to figure out which canned tomatoes that you happen to like the best. But before we break everything down, let me thank today's sponsor, Geico, who also know a thing or two about saving money and making a confident purchasing decision. We'll talk a bit more about Geico later, but now let's go into why we chose the particular cans for testing. So let's welcome in the candidates.
Here are the 6 cans that will be run through the testing during this video. First, we have the generic store brand at $1.40, the questionable marketing San American tomato at $4.68, a high-end Bianco di Napoli as showcased on Chef's Table at $5.99. Then we have the San Marzano style tomato at $5.79, the third-party certified San Marzano tomato at $4.69, and lastly, what many call the Holy Grail, the D.O.P certified San Marzano tomato, clocking in at $6.30.
Now, I didn't just pick the first 6 cans I saw when walking down the grocery aisle. I actually combed through about 15 or so before deciding on these 6 for a specific reason, because they should give us a fairly holistic view at the canned tomato landscape. And your first question might be, why only whole peeled tomatoes?
So on a sliding scale of least processed to most processed, these are the typical options at the grocery store. We have whole peeled, diced, crushed, pureed, and then tomato paste, which is going to be a cooked down and concentrated version. Now, for purposes of this video, I chose to focus in on the whole peeled tomatoes form factor for 2 reasons. One, it's the most regulated, and secondly, it's the most versatile for home cooks. Because these are the most regulated, in theory, this should lead to more consistency in flavor and texture, because packers are generally going to save their ripest and most attractive tomatoes for the whole peeled cans, while the lesser ones are probably going to be used in the pastes and purees. Additionally, the ingredients and terms are fairly easy to compare and should also be applicable to, say, a diced tomato or puree from the same brand. Then, in terms of versatility, whole peeled tomatoes can obviously be used whole if needed, but we can also just dice, crush, or puree them at home if we please.
Next, let's take a look at the location and tomato variety of these cans, because it's actually pretty interesting once you start pulling them out of the can.
Here is one tomato from each of the 6 cans, and as you can see, they come in varying shapes and sizes. But what I found very interesting is that these are actually all plum tomato varieties, which then led me to wonder, why are plum tomatoes used for canning? Take a look at this picture. In general, compared to other varieties, Plum tomatoes like the San Marzano are going to have more tomato flesh, fewer seeds, and lower water content, which is ideal for those cooking sauces, and the elongated plum shape of a San Marzano means it's almost entirely tomato flesh with a low proportion of seeds and watery juice, unlike those other examples. What's even more cool is how many plum tomato varietals there are, as evidenced by this chart from Johnny's Select Seeds, and each of them are going to be just a little bit different in terms of taste, texture, and the flesh to seed ratio.
Now, from what I've been able to find, there's really just 3 primary varietables that you'll typically find in the cans at the grocery store.
First is the Roma, which is generally going to be used if it's unspecified, such as the generic store brand and the San American ones. Second, we have the San Marzano. This is the official San Marzano tomato seed as used by the Cento brand and D.O.P cert tomatoes. And then lastly, we have a San Marzano style, which is going to be very similar but is some type of seed offshoot from the original. Now, if you've ever wondered about what tomato varieties are best, most articles or videos will immediately direct you to a San Marzano variety.
Which led me to wonder, why of all the plum varieties did the San Marzano tomato get so popular?
The 2 main arguments are that 1, these are sweeter and less acidic than other canned tomatoes, and secondly, this is the gold standard for the meaty flesh to seed ratio. Now, we'll get to the sweeter and less acidic argument in just a second with our taste test, but first, let's take a look under the hood. I sliced open each tomato down the line, and here they are. And I'll let you decide, but while cutting them, it definitely seemed like the Roma varieties let out more tomato water than the 4 San Marzano types. And this could affect both the taste and texture of the sauce that I cook, but before I do that, I wanted to do a raw taste test of each can.
So I'll be the first to admit, this taste test is probably not going to be the most useful one in this video, but I'm personally very curious how these actually taste raw after I pulled them apart. Especially from not only a taste perspective, but also texture, because some of these are very, very firm to the touch. So I'm curious how that comes through when I actually bite in them raw, and then later on once we actually get into the cooking. So what I'm gonna do is pop a blindfold on. I'm gonna have Gabe switch all these around so you guys will know which ones are which, but I won't while I'm taste testing. So I'll see you in like 2 seconds. All I'll notice is that the seeds I noticed on that one at the end. Oh, wow. All right, that was pretty different. The texture, I think, was the big thing I noticed. This one tasted like less like canned tomatoes, I guess I would say. Again, way softer on the texture compared to the first one. Like, I'd put that about on par with number 2. 3 might have been a little bit more acidic than number 2 though. Texture on that one, not my favorite. Texture was good, I like the texture. Like, definitely the softer feel, but yeah, I didn't like that one. That one felt a little bit acidic. A little bit more acidic, a little bit firmer texture too. So I think, like, of these, before I look at them, I think, yeah, number 2 is probably my favorite if I had to guess right now. Just a little bit sweeter, softer texture. 3 was also pretty good. So outside of maybe using the canned tomatoes for a salsa or like a raw pizza sauce using Neapolitan pizza, this might not be the most applicable test, but I'm glad I did it because I kept noticing this kind of off-putting texture when I was handling and actually tasting them, and that was from the Roma tomatoes. Now, Roma tomatoes might be a little firmer than a San Marzano in general, but these were like weirdly firm, and I found that this is likely the result of adding one ingredient to these cans, and that is calcium chloride.
Calcium chloride is a common firming agent used in a variety of canned vegetables, and for the tomatoes, it's going to help keep them intact during packing, but also during cooking. Now obviously, I can just blend up tomatoes before cooking, so maybe the firming agent isn't a big deal if I want a really smooth sauce, but the real question for me is, does the calcium chloride affect the taste?
However, before I jump into that taste test, this is also a good time to bring up all the potential ingredients that can be listed on a can of tomatoes, because sometimes it's as few as 2 or 3, or it can go all the way up to 5 or 6.
These are 1, the tomato varietal, Secondly, tomato juice or puree that is used to pack around the tomatoes. Then we have salt, calcium chloride, citric acid, and flavorings such as basil leaf.
Now, salt is pretty obvious. We touched on what calcium chloride does, but what does citric acid do?
Citric acid is added to ensure the pH of canned tomatoes is safe for canning. And additionally, tomatoes are going to naturally vary in pH depending on the variety and ripeness, so adding that citric acid allows brands to ensure consistent pH across the batches, which could have an effect on flavor. So I actually got a pH meter for this video and pureed each can of tomatoes and then took the pH for each batch. Now, all of them ended up being within a tenth or two of each other, but the Italian imports were consistently less acidic on the pH scale.
Now, I don't know if I would start reading too much into this pH test because I don't really know what a tenth of a point on the pH scale really equates to taste-wise. Like, I don't know if that's something we can perceive every time, because I think the Bianco one ended up being lower on the pH scale from this meter, but when I was actually tasting it raw, I noted that it was kind of sweeter. However, pH aside, there is one other variable worth noting, and that is where the tomato variety is actually grown.
For example, will the exact same tomato grown from the same seed taste different if it's grown in a different location? Well, if you ask Italy, they're going to say yes, which is why they have the D.O.P certification found on the can. And this D.O.P certification means that the tomatoes were used in the specific San Marzano seed type and were also grown in the specific location that has proximity to Mount Vesuvius.
Also, it's important to note that just because something tastes different doesn't mean it's inherently better. Like, it could be true that San Marzanos are sweeter overall, but you may not like sweet tomatoes in your tomato sauce. So that's why it's actually important to go through the testing. And hopefully you can see now why I decided to choose these 6 cans, because it not only gives us a variety of the tomato type, it gives us a variety of where these tomatoes are grown and the ingredients that were added. So with that being said, let's get into what I think is the most important test for me, and that is making my favorite tomato sauce.
I made 6 identical batches of Marcella Hazan's 3-ingredient sauce, which ended up being 300 grams of the blended tomatoes, 25 grams of unsalted butter, 1/8 of an onion, and 2 grams of salt. Additionally, these were all cooked in the same exact pot, set on a 30-minute timer at a consistent 205 degrees Fahrenheit on the Breville Control Freak, which is the absolute most consistent I could possibly replicate at home. I also ensured that the temperatures were roughly the same at tasting.
Perfect. All right, I've got all of these right in between 90 to 95 degrees, which should be like the perfect temperature for me to fully taste differences. So I'm gonna have Gabe mix these up. We're gonna put the, the classic TikTok like Coke thing over the top, and then actually compare and contrast and see if there's differences in terms of both taste and texture. All right, let's get into this. It's good. Texture really nice on that one, nice and thick. Those, very, very similar. I would say right now, this one a little bit better. I like the texture a little bit thicker. This one also is a nice, really nice mouthfeel as well, but let's go down the line. Noticeably thinner, also a little bit more acidic, I would say. It's kind of tough to tell the differences. This was the one, I think, in terms of taste. That one, much more similar to these two. Maybe a little bit sweeter on this one, too. This one tastes noticeably more sour. Or not like sour, but I mean, more acidic for sure, and it also, like, this still tastes like canned tomatoes. It doesn't taste like a nicely cooked sauce. Also a little bit on the thinner side. So I think this one and this one were on the thinner side, which I'm not a big fan of for tomato sauce. That one is really nice and mellow. I think it's these two are my least favorite. They're noticeably thinner and more sour, especially this one tastes very much like, it's got like a canned taste. These taste all really good, these 4. This one's okay. Again, I think I need to try this in a coordination of one of these to see what we can go. Yeah, this one's definitely like nice and sweet, rounded out, mellow edges. This one is also sweet, but it tastes like very like tomatoey. This almost tastes like if I added like tomato paste to this. That's how like tomatoey this one tastes. I'm a big fan of that one. Coming back to this one, this is noticeably more sour than these two, I would say. But still very good, not as sour as that one. All right, so quick recap before I look at them. These two I would say are the most similar in terms of like, these are the more sweeter and like kind of mellowed out ones. But I like this one a little bit better because it still tastes more tomatoey to me than this one does. I think it's these two are the more acidic and like sour ones. This one especially I'm not a fan of. And then this one and this one I would say are both a little bit more acidic than these two. If I were to pick though, I would 100% go with any of these four would be perfectly fine for me. So while I like the tomato forwardness of the DeLallo San Marzano style the best, that's not actually my main takeaway. My main takeaway is how much these four cans were an upgrade from these two, and these were the only aromas. These were the San Marzano and the San Marzano style. However, I don't think that is the only reason why these ones were so much better.
The two canned tomatoes that I really was not a fan of, while yes, they are a Roma tomato, are also the only cans that have calcium chloride added, and they are also the only cans that were packed in a watery tomato juice. If you take a look at the ingredient label of the generic San American, Bianco, and DeLallo brands, they all list tomato juice on the can, while the Centro and San Marzanos both say tomato puree.
So you would think that these four cans should be packed in a similar viscous liquid, but that's actually not the case.
Once you open up each can and take a look, the Bianco and DeLallo brands are actually packed in a noticeably thicker puree, just like the San Marzano varieties, while the generic and San American is basically all tomato water. Now this is important for two reasons. One, a puree-like substance has more tomato flavor than a watery liquid, and secondly, it's gonna cook down into a thicker sauce instead of a watery one. And this was something I noticed immediately in the test. Since I cooked each sauce for 30 minutes, the four cans with the puree-like substance were noticeably thicker, and in my opinion, just creates a flat-out better texture.
Now to avoid this, obviously you could cook your sauce down more or like pour off some of that tomato juice in there, but then you're kind of wasting what you paid for and you end up with less sauce than what you would get from one of the cans that are packed in the tomato puree.
So after this test, my main takeaway is to avoid cans with calcium chloride and a watery tomato juice, but the story can't end here because we've only tested this on a basic tomato sauce, and I'm wondering, are these flavors that I did not like in this sauce still going to be prevalent in a heavily spiced dish?
Now I could have done chili, shakshuka, or countless options for this test, but I personally was in the mood for some butter chicken.
Now this is in no way a super traditional recipe, but I made a quick spice mix with 1 part garam masala, 1 part turmeric, 1/3 part garlic powder, 1/3 part coriander, 1/2 part cayenne powder, and 1 part cumin. Then I threw some chicken breast on the skillet that was marinated in yogurt and that spice mix, and once that was cooked, I prepped 6 identical batches of sauce. I took 100 grams of the cooked tomato sauce, added 2 grams of the spice mix, 5 grams of butter, and 50 grams of heavy cream before mixing that up and letting it bubble. Lastly, I tossed in 50 grams of the cooked chicken and stewed that down for just 2 or 3 minutes. Again, I tried to keep the temperature right around 120 degrees Fahrenheit for eating, and these are the main questions I had before coming into this taste test. 1, are the 2 acidic and metal tasting cans still noticeable? And secondly, will I like the same can for this test? Or is there going to be a new canned tomato that is best suited for this particular use case? Before the final taste test, thank you again to Geico for sponsoring today's episode. I'm partnering with Geico this year to explore how you can save both time and money in the kitchen. So check out the link below to see all the ways that you could switch and save with Geico. But lastly, let's see how those tomatoes stack up in the butter chicken test.
All right, everybody, now time for some butter chicken. Not really a super authentic recipe, just kind of threw it together real quick, but this is another use case that I would do all the time at home, and I'm really curious to see if, especially the bottom two that I didn't like as much, if those flavors still carry through into something with a lot of, heavy cream and spices added. So I'm gonna have Gabe mix them up for me, I'm gonna blindfold, and then we'll give them a taste test. Okay, let's just start on the left. I mean, it's good. Much like smoother, a little bit mellower too, which I like. That one tasted a little more tomatoey, I would say, a little more tomato forward. I also like this one a lot too, mellower. I didn't get a piece of chicken though. That one's good. I like that one. I think 4 and 2 I think are my favorites so far. That one's definitely mellower too. I like that one. Noticeably more acidic. I think this is the most acidic. 2 is like nice and mellow and creamy. It almost feels like there's more heavy cream in it, but I know there's not. Like, I literally weighed it out. It's at 50 grams exactly on all of these. This one's really nice too, but it's more tomato forward. It's not as acidic as the out ones, but more, that one's also really nice. 2 and 4 I think are my favorites. 1 and 6 are acidic. I think this was probably my least favorite, 6. Like, it's pretty tart. 3 is pretty good too. So 2 was Cento, 4 was Delalo's, which Delalo was my top one from the other. 5 was good, D.O.P, and then, yeah, the American and the generic. So again, these two definitely were outliers, I think. Like, I definitely didn't like these. I mean, they're acidic, but not nearly as tinny. Like, I wouldn't describe them as like that tinny aluminum can, which I did get in the earlier test. So I don't feel like that came through, but they're definitely significantly more sour than these 4. Again, I'm probably putting these in like the bottom category. 2 and 4 were just really, like, especially 2. I don't know why 2 just like tasted so much better this time around, but all 4 in the middle, very, very good options. So I think to round up this video, let's get up a little table you guys can look and hopefully figure out what type of canned tomatoes you want to buy. So in conclusion, I hope you realize I didn't want to make this video about identifying a specific brand as the best overall, because as you can see, it kind of depends on what you're going for. For example, I could totally make the case that I have a can of the Bianco on hand for a raw application like Neapolitan pizza. I keep Delalo brand style tomato forwardness for my pasta sauces or cooked pizza sauces. And then maybe I keep a can of the Cento on hand for the butter chicken or a cream-based sauce like pasta alla vodka.
What I wanted to do is understand all the terms and knowledge around tomato types, growing locations, and how added ingredients can affect the taste so we can confidently make an informed purchasing decision. And with that being said, here's how I would recommend shopping for canned tomatoes. Take a look at the ingredient list and 1, avoid cans with calcium chloride added. Secondly, look for cans packed in tomato puree, or if it says tomato juice, sometimes it may be thicker than you actually think, so you're gonna need to open it up and see. Third, look for cans with the Plum varietal specified, such as a San Marzano or San Marzano style. And lastly, I would pick 2 or 3 cans and experiment for yourself with a taste test, whether it's your favorite tomato sauce, chili recipe, or butter chicken.
So I hope you all have enjoyed, and let me know down in the comments if you have topics or ingredients for me to explore in a similar type video, because I honestly just have a lot of fun doing them and I learn a lot, and hopefully you do too. But that's gonna wrap it up for me in this one. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.